So, first of all, a little slow on sleep. We were in Alaska yesterday. But I just want to take a second and introduce the TBS team, and then we'll go ahead and introduce the Aetna team, and then we'll get started. So in the back, on the right-hand side is Carrie McSwain. Her and Danny head up our international sales division. Also in the back, Mike Crisetto. My name's John Henry. Hopefully you know me. If you don't, good opportunity to meet me, and thank you very much for coming. Mike and I lead TBS. And on the Aetna side?
Sure. Hi, I'm Kim Mendoza.
Thanks. Can you guys hear me? That's better. I'm Kim Mendoza. I'm the head of SME division, which is small and medium enterprises for Aetna International. And our team is quite large. We have quite a few folks here today, so if you guys want to stand up so everyone can see you. Starting with Mike Delmer, who is our general manager of the Americas. Mike is here from Tampa today. Shelly Shepperson in the back is our manager of sales and service. Stephanie Kipley, whom I'm sure all of you know, our senior sales executive. And Michael Yu, our account manager, senior account manager. And Geneva Solomon came up from Los Angeles as well. Did I miss any of our team? I think that's... And Greg, sorry Greg. I think everyone knows Greg. Sorry Greg. And then our guest speaker today is Jack Cloonan, and I'll give a more detailed introduction of Jack when we get to that section. So thanks for joining us, and we're looking forward to a great conversation today.
Thanks, Kim. I did miss our newest employee, Jake, who's hiding back over here. He's on our new business sales team. If you wouldn't mind just giving him a quick round of applause. So hopefully that I won't have too many more mistakes to the presentation, but I just want to thank Aetna for their partnership. And before I start, I wanted to just go into a little bit about why TBS and Aetna are doing this. We have a passion and have had a passion for international business for a long time. If you know Mike and I, you know that we started out working together. We had an international pharmacy benefit management company for about 15 years. That kind of got the international bug in our blood. And about 6 years ago, when Obamacare and the ACA were putting all of our business at risk, we were very nervous because the core of our business is small and mid-sized domestic health insurance. And we were looking into what can we do to make sure that we can continue to be viable for our brokers and for ourselves. So we made a really deliberate effort to learn as much as we could about international health insurance. We made some specific goals, and those goals were in the next 3 years to have 30% of our business coming from international. And I can tell you here we are now in 2017, and it's closer to 40%. And I say that not to impress you, but to impress upon you, we made a goal, we did the research, and we followed a path. The other part of that is some of you in here are brokers, some of you are employers, but all of that business is written through brokers. So we're writing it through brokers. We'd like to write more through you. I don't want to make this a big advertisement, but it really is impressive that we were able to do that, and we were able to do it with you as our partners. So thank you. As we go into the slide deck, we're going to cover a couple of things today. One, I'm going to go over just some summaries of what the world is for a business traveler today. We're going to talk a little about international business expansion, some of the risks, health, crime, terrorism, political risks, duty of care, the responsibility employers have. Going to go over a quick shameless plug on the international product overview with Kim. Then we're going to go over to Jack, which I'm sure is probably the primary reason everybody's here. And he's going to have a conversation with us about his experience in the international risk world. Then we'll have a little Q&A and some practical takeaways. On the Q&A side, Jack's going to talk about hostage negotiations, bribes, and how he gets people back sometimes. So I took some liberty and decided it might be a good idea to have some real-world bribes today. So if you're thinking about a question you might want to ask Jack, we want to make sure you're not shy, or if you are shy, that the chocolate bar on the table will help get you over the shyness. So for the first 5 or 6 questions, get the ball rolling, we'll have some nice bribes. And then for the best question, either if you can stump Jack or you get one that's really, really interesting, and that'll be decided by Mike in the back. Then you will receive a bottle of wine, and we'll do that at the end. So
Can we play?
you played the other night, and she didn't win. That's why the wine's still here. So a couple of quick things. Everybody, especially in the Pacific Northwest and Seattle, we see it all the time. You look at all of the cranes around Seattle, I think the stat is about 50% of those are Chinese-funded operations. We are not, it's not uncommon for us to see international business in Seattle. But I think everybody thinks about international business with the Amazons and the Microsofts, but there are a ton of small enterprises, NGOs, just entrepreneurs like us out there working outside of the U.S. Some of the stats from USA Today, 86% of global economic growth the next decade is projected to be outside the U.S. Why are they doing that? Why are companies going outside the U.S.? It's pretty straightforward. Reduce costs, grow revenue. The same reason we decided to back in 2010, we wanted to find another revenue stream. And I actually updated this slide this morning because I thought, how difficult is it to find some businesses, some smaller companies in our backyard that are doing this? About a 5-minute Google search. This company in Bellevue, Pacific Valley Foods, exports 90% of its food products to just about every corner of the globe, including India and Pakistan. Not exactly low-risk places. They distribute berries and other food products. This is in Bellevue, Washington. This is now the Tri-Cities. This is in our backyard. Another one, this is not my company or my family's company, but it popped up this morning. The Henry's Architects. It's a small boutique architect firm. Didn't do any international business about 10 years ago. Now the bulk of their international business is building movie theaters in China. So the companies are out there, they're in our backyard. It's important as trusted advisors for us that we're asking the right questions to make sure they're safe when they send their people abroad. And I'm also saying this from a personal experience. We opened our global operations platform in the Philippines 5 years ago yesterday. We started out with 2 people there. We have close to, I think it's 40 there now. So this is something that we're really familiar with. So you think about these companies, small, large, medium-sized, sending their employees overseas to beachhead or to start a new revenue stream or to work with suppliers. Who are they sending over there? They're not sending the low-level college intern. They're sending over high income, high impact, high value individuals. They're expecting a lot. These are the business development people. These are people who are really important to the company. And if something happens to them, it's not only a safety issue, but it's a business issue, right? A failed foreign assignment can easily cost the company $500,000. That's just the dollars and cents. But it's also a moral obligation that if something happens health-wise, they're going to be taken care of. And I'm going to go into a quick concept called duty of care. This concept of duty of care says that companies have a legal and moral obligation to ensure the health, safety, and well-being of staff on foreign assignment. Pretty straightforward. If you have any companies that are sending people overseas, it's imperative that you understand this because the legal obligation is becoming more and more severe. The moral obligation should be a no-brainer, right? I'm going to tell a quick personal story. When we opened up our facility in the Philippines, we do what I thought was a good idea, which is if you're going to send somebody over for your new operation, you can send them over in a foreign workspace to train new people, and you're a little bit nervous about it not going well, or if that person's safety and health are going to be okay, you send over a relative, right? So I sent over my little brother, and we sent him there for 5 weeks, and about a week and a half in, he called me about 2 in the morning, and he couldn't sleep. He had really bad headaches. So we're thinking brain tumor. My first response was, let's get him on a plane. Let's get him back to Seattle. But we had him call the international hotline. They got him into the hospital. They did a brain scan. His brain, don't quote me on this, was fine. But what they found was he had really, really high elevations of sodium. He was eating all the local food, really, really salty, different than what he was used to. He was also going back and forth between the night shift and the day shift, like it was going, from the 8 o'clock shift in the morning to 9 o'clock shift in the morning. He wasn't sleeping very well. The combination of those things was giving him migraines. Once they worked with him and we worked with him to get him on a reasonable sleep schedule and a diet that was more that he was accustomed to, he got back to normal. It took about 3 or 4 days, and then he could finish his assignment. So it saved us a lot of money not having to send him back and ruin the program that we had. It saved me some personal strife. If something happened to him, my mother would never forgive me. She's his favorite. So that's just a silly story. But another story about the same area is the Philippines is a high risk area for kidnapping, and Jack will go into that. It's not so bad if you're in the business districts, which is where we tend to be, but little decisions that people make can influence an okay or a shady situation going to a really bad situation very quickly. And we had an employee also go to our office over there, and this has changed the way we do our pre-trip planning. And if you don't remember anything else from me in my presentation, pre-trip planning on an international assignment is one of the most important, if not the most important things. So we've changed ours a little bit with diet and sleep, and we've added this other part. This employee is a smoker, and he works like crazy. And he went out in front of the hotel, have a quick smoke break, met somebody in the park there, just hanging out, super nice. Next thing you know, he's shaking down for $200, right? $200, that stinks to lose some money. It could have been a lot worse, right? So those are some of the things that we just don't think about when I'm traveling to LA for the weekend, or doing some of the things you think about when you're sending someone to go to Omaha for a business trip, but are different when you're sending someone outside of their home country and you need some additional information and insight. Duty of care also carries over to health risks. Do you have an international health policy that they can easily call up if they have a situation? On the pre-trip planning, if you're sending someone to South America and they are of maternity age, Zika virus is really important, right? What about the bird flu? If you go over to Asia. This one right here, I put this on because Kim Mendoza and I were in London and Paris about 2 weeks ago. And this reminded me of a story that Mike and I heard from a friend of ours who runs a company there. They had an executive come off the plane, 14 hours, super tired, first day on the job. Still wanted to just go in right that day. Didn't look the left way, they looked the left way instead of the right way. And that was their first and last day on the job. Yeah. So certain things that are really, really important, you don't think about until you just do a little bit of pre-trip planning and understand the risks that are associated with being in those locations. I think I probably have a mark right here across my chest from Kim going, jump, jump. So I'm telling you the advice, but it's good to have a partner or somebody with you who's helping you live the advice. Safety risks. Jack will talk a lot more about this, but political instability, natural disasters, the Arab Spring, places that once were pretty safe to go to and predictable are not always the case anymore. Typhoons. We deal with this every fall with our office in the Philippines. It's typhoon season. What's going to happen? How are you going to deal with it? What's your emergency plan for getting somebody out? We had to deal with this. Felicity in our office, her flight was diverted on Mother's Day about 2 years ago, and we had to figure out how to get her out. Right? It's a lot easier to do that if you plan ahead than you wait until the situation starts to unravel. The world today, terrorism and crime. This is not my picture, but I put it up there because when Kim and I were in Paris 2 weeks ago, we walked by that shrine. It happened a week before we were there, where the terrorist shot the police officers. You wouldn't have thought too much about sending people to Europe 5 years ago without security insurance, but nowadays it doesn't really matter. I mean, it could be San Bernardino, it could be London, it could be Nice. It can happen just about anywhere. And to have a plan ahead of time can really make the difference. This part over here, this was a little eye-opening for me. I think about the other risks pretty commonly, but kidnap and ransom doesn't really register with me all that many times until I had dinner with Jack Monday night. And this slide here, if anyone speaks Spanish, can you tell us what this says?
It says, Daddy, please pay, I don't want to die.
Yeah. That's the kind of pictures you receive in the middle of the night when someone's kidnapped. What do you do? Who do you call? Does it matter if it takes you a couple days to find someone to call, or if you have someone to call that minute, right then? I'm going to take that nice tone and pass along to Kevin.
Okay, is that good? Yeah.
Audience
Okay,
participation
thanks, John.
counts too.
All right, there you go.
Oh, yeah, firsthand. So, as John mentioned, as companies are becoming more global in nature, security and protection is becoming top of mind for more and more employers, brokers, plan sponsors as they think about what is the duty of care as my members are traveling all around the world. And as John mentioned, the scary areas that we used to think about we're not limited to those areas now, right? So as John mentioned, common areas where you may have employees traveling, Paris, for example, where all of a sudden we're now looking at how do we protect the employees and make sure that we have that critical speed to response if something were to happen. At Aetna, many of you are very familiar with our approach to caring for the members and making sure that wherever they are in the world, that they have access to quality health care and that we can take care of them and make sure that they get that access to quality care. We've taken that a step beyond now, recognizing this new or evolving need for the protection for the members when they're traveling as well. We have partnered with TBS, and John mentioned, trusted advisors when he was opening and talking about that duty of care. And in our partnership with TBS, it's really important for us to be that trusted advisor for you, and that's part of having Jack here today to give that information. And we can work with you to design plans that really make sense based on your employee's needs. To do that, we started with really what I would call sort of the most basic protection that your travelers will need when they're going around the world. We worked with TBS for about 2 years, creating and brainstorming. A couple of years ago, John and Mike came to Stephanie and I and said, here's what we need. We want to private label this product, we want to add leisure travel, and so we've been working with them and then had this opportunity to partner with Red 24 to really create this comprehensive solution that you'll see today. So we call the product Travel Well, and it combines what many of you are probably familiar with, a traditional travel medical policy. Ours is branded as the World Traveler product. Many of you are probably familiar with it or may even have it for your employees today. And that offers the coverage for the medical when the members are traveling, 100% care, no pre-ex, prescription drug benefits, medical evacuation. So pretty, comprehensive medical solution when your members are traveling. But what's critically important, given the security and the protection issues that we have now, is what we now call Protect. And this adds the element of protection for the members when they're traveling as it relates to security, as it relates to kidnap and ransom situations. And it also, and political and natural disaster as well. We have a pre-travel planning component that's both at a member level as well as at an employer level that we'll talk a little bit about. And then a really nice, by popular demand actually, is adding a leisure component as well. So one of the questions that we would get from employers, this comes up really often actually in Silicon Valley, where some of the employers still have sabbaticals. So if you work there for a certain number of years, you get to take 6 weeks off, that type of thing. And we had companies coming to us and saying, this is great that you have the travel policies and that you can expand that if you're going on a little vacation affiliated with your work trip. But what about when we have employees that are just going on a vacation overseas? We as their employer providing benefits still feel that obligation to make sure that they're taken care of wherever they are in the world. And so we now can offer that as well, not tied to a business trip. So it's a really, really nice new addition. So that's Travel Well. Y'all are quite familiar, I'm sure, with these products through talking with Danny, with Carrie, with Stephanie, Michael, and the team here locally. But of course, just a quick touch base on these, the expat and impat, so this remains a core part of our business, taking care of employees when they're going on assignments for either short period or extended periods of time. Impats as well, so a lot of our tech companies have folks coming into the U.S. that need ACA compliant care. We can take care of them as well. A lot of Japanese companies have Japanese rotational assignments where members come in for about a 2-year period. That's a big core part of how we can help you as well. Access US is a product that we worked with TBS to create several years ago to really help non-US headquartered companies who are hiring US local employees that need access to ACA compliant care. A lot of this business is Canadian companies that are hiring, say 10, 15, 20 employees here in the US, but it's not limited to Canadian companies. So there's a real interesting opportunity to help employers who are headquartered outside of the US but have hired, say, business development folks or other folks, maybe a handful of employees coming into the US. So if you have clients or if you yourself as a plan sponsor have that type of situation, talk to Danny, Carrie, the TBS team, or Stephanie, and we can give you a little more information on that. And then I just put sort of a catch-all, custom solutions, because what we find in the international business is that there's a lot of gray area. There are a lot of unique situations that require us to sit down and to listen to you and to understand your needs and to create a solution with you. And that's where Stephanie and the TBS team really come in as that trusted advisor to listen to you and to understand what you need and then to create that solution for you. I'll just touch on pre-trip planning really quickly. It is a critically important part of making sure that someone is prepared for that journey. When we talk about John's brother and you hear that situation, part of the planning could be as simple as understanding what dietary differences you're going to experience in a particular country and how you can overcome that. How do you make sure that you stick with your travel workout regimen? But then also much more complex questions that people have as well. How about my prescription drugs? Can I get them there? How do I get them there? Can I take them into the country? What over-the-counter meds can I take in without some sort of, associated prescription? These become really important questions as we help members prepare to work overseas. John talked about looking, the right way, when you're traveling in the UK. These are things that seem like you would just figure it out, but the reality is there is so much on someone's mind when they're traveling to another country. There's a little bit of stress. There's the agenda of why they're there in the first place, that it's easy to forget about a lot of this other stuff, and it can be the matter of life or death. So before we get into Jack's presentation, the last thing that I want to say as we set this up is when you think about creating a plan for security preparedness, if you will, what we find are a couple things that are critically important. One is having a written, detailed plan. What is your plan if all of a sudden someone is in a high-risk situation and they're on the phone with the employer saying, we have this person, what do you do? Who do you call? Because oftentimes you're going to be the first person that they call. And so it's really important to have a detailed plan that looks at these different contingencies. The second thing is response time, and you'll hear this with Jack, but one of the most critical factors of whether or not it's successful or not is how quickly can you respond with a plan to help that member. And quite frankly, in these more severe situations, that can literally be the difference between life or death. So to frame the conversation, I wanted to give a little bit of background on Jack. I took notes in case just to be sure. Jack is a former FBI agent, 27 years. He was the president of Clayton Consultants, which is another risk management company. He is now the head of the special risk team at Red 24. So when it comes to a kidnap and ransom negotiation, Jack is the guy. His team are the people who are literally getting on the phone and handling negotiations. We've been with Jack over the last couple days, and he's actually been involved in active negotiations while we've been on the trip. And one of the most, one of the things that sort of, raised the hair on my arms, if you will, was just hearing about Jack's experience as the lead agent on the Bin Laden task force. And so he'll have a couple stories around that. So we're really, really pleased to have this conversation with Jack and have him here as our special guest today. So Jack.
I have been accustomed to wearing a wire before. But this is a little bit bigger and more inside one. Hello, hello, testing. Good afternoon, everybody. Can you hear me? Yes. Thank you so much, and I want to thank my colleagues from TBS and my colleagues from Aetna for bringing me here. They're a great crew to travel with. I've learned a lot in the last couple of days about risk management, particularly in Anchorage. But listen, what I want to do today, I'm going to tell you, notice that behind me I don't have a PowerPoint, so there's not going to be any depth of PowerPoint today. I'm going to have a conversation. I do tend to walk around. I do tend to make eye contact with people, not to make you particularly uncomfortable, but I just want you to make sure that we have a conversation and we can talk about things meaningful. I need to explain to you a little bit about what Red 24 is, because many of you may not know what Red 24 is, and you may not know what a response company is like and what we do. So, with a little bit of house cleaning. Red 24 is a British company. Until recently, we were traded on the Alternative Investment Exchange in London, but about 4 months ago, we were purchased by a risk management company in the United States called iJet, which is located in Annapolis, Maryland. But we have offices in Annapolis, we have offices in Singapore, we have offices in Frankfurt, and in London, and in Hong Kong. We're going to be opening up some new offices. So we have a global footprint, and we were set up as a company specifically to deal with the business traveler. And the business traveler in every sense of the word. I'm not going to suggest to you that we're a travel agency. That's not what we are. What we're doing is we're a crisis management company, and we deal with people who oftentimes are in crisis. And that crisis can run the gamut, can't it? And what I love about this type of product, and I love about these type of the way this presentation has been framed for you, is that they focus in on some things that I think are absolutely critical for you. We are accustomed to working as a company with the insurance industry. We understand the role of the broker, and we know how important it is for you in your relationship with your clients. And that, you know, if you're really true to your game, what you want to do is solve all the issues for your clients. And when I hope that the takeaway from here today is that you can go back to your clients and have a conversation with them in a very meaningful way about some of the risks that they may not even be aware of. And that's important for me to understand. And again, I want to have a conversation with you. Any of you who wants to learn more about our company, you can see the folks at Aetna, and you can get on, and I'll get you a password, you get onto our website and you get a look around the website. Because there's a lot of information on there that's very apropos to the business traveler. You heard earlier from John, he talked about the concept of duty of care. And if you can keep that in mind as we talk here today, and you see that as the overall arching philosophy here, that's important for you to understand, because duty of care is defined by the law, and as John said, it really means that you have a responsibility, or employers have responsibilities to make sure that their employees, when they travel, not necessarily to a high-risk environment, they can be any place, that they are prepared. And the standard of proof, and this is absolutely critical to that, the standard of proof is this, that if you fail to provide your employees with that adequate security plan, pre-planning, and all that stuff, you are compared. In other words, if you're a nonprofit, you're compared to another nonprofit on the burden of proof as to what you've done. If you're a small business, you're compared to another small business. That's the burden of proof. That's what the United States or in a court would require. So when you start to think and talk to your clients, think in terms of the size, the numbers of clients they have, where they're going, and this is a policy that might be very apropos to them. So as I indicated to you, we were set up to help clients in crisis. And crisis, as I said a moment ago, can run the gamut. So let's talk a little bit about what some of these crises are and how we handle them, and what are the type of things that we're seeing. What's on the increase? What areas of the world that we see more events happening? We have a crisis response center located in Cape Town, South Africa. I hope sometime you ever get a chance to travel to Cape Town, because it's a wonderful place. That Cape Town crisis center is manned 24/7. We have 80 full-time staff down there. It's comprised of customer service, crisis support, and analytical teams. We spit out a lot of information about analysis. That could range everything from an in-depth country report. An in-depth country report might say, you have a client that's traveling, let's say, to Pakistan, and you want to know what's going on in Pakistan from a 30,000-foot overview, down to where you can go in the city, what hotel you can go to, where you can get a blood transfusion. So it's all geared towards the business traveler. It might be something a little bit different. It might be simply a phone briefing. Last year alone, we handled over 28,000 phone calls. And again, primarily with the business traveler. So our concept is we would much rather reach out to the business traveler in advance, find out what their concerns are, and kind of do a lifestyle pre-planning process so that they know what they should and shouldn't do. They should know where to go and what not to do. And what we also like to do is a check-in service. Now that sounds rather simple, doesn't it, a check-in service? But you would be surprised the benefits that we derive from a check-in service. And what does a check-in service look like? I know I was talking to a colleague here from Gallagher who had some clients, I think, that were in China. You know, we would have a check-in service, for example, if you had a CEO from a company or anybody going over to China, whether it's Beijing or going out into the suburbs someplace, and we would set a prearranged time where we were in contact with that person, and we would call them at a designated time, and we would check in, and it'd be simply something like this. How are you? Are you sticking to your itinerary? We have a copy of their itinerary. And you know what that does? It builds confidence to the business traveler. They have a safe place to land. As I was explaining to some people yesterday, the worst thing that can happen to a business traveler or to an employer who can't make contact with their employee, that's dead air and you don't know what's happening. And that's what sets off alarm bells. So that's what we often do, is to have that check-in service. It seems really simple, doesn't it? But it's a great little thing to build in confidence. Now that's on the low end of things. I mean, we take phone calls every day about somebody's lost a passport. And you know, do you think it's easy to get a passport when you lose it? Do you think the United States government and the embassy is going to use that as its top priority that day? I was just thinking to myself, and I don't want to be politically incorrect, but there probably are a few people in the White House right now that might need an evac plan. Not that I want to mention any names. But we would do things like that. So the pre-planning process is vitally important. You lose your passport. What happens if you get into an accident in Thailand? You get in an accident in Thailand, and it seems like it might be a simple explanation for it, a traffic accident. What's wrong with that? But what happens when the police officer comes up to you and says, I can make this go away? And all it requires is what?
Money.
Something like this. And what happens if you give them that money? You might find yourself in a worse situation. Well, that's happened to us. It shouldn't happen to us. It happens to a lot of our clients. What happens when you go into China? You've had a long-standing relationship with a business operation in China. But somehow, the CEO from, and this is a real case, the CEO from a UK-based company went over to China because he had some issues with the local management. You may have seen this on television. There was a picture on CNN of a guy hanging out the window. It was a UK business person who had been held against his will because the local purveyor of his goods didn't like the way the debt was settled. And we got called. He was held in his hotel room, hostage, because the Chinese government is going to side with who? The local Chinese. I'm not going to parachute in and solve the problem in China. I don't look Chinese, I don't speak the language, and I'm not going to be very effective. But if that person's sitting there, held in his hotel room at one point with a knife to his neck, something has to be done, and it has to be done right away. He is a business traveler. He didn't anticipate this. A debt went bad, but he was just doing his due diligence. Now he's in a real bad situation. So how do you get him out? How do you settle the dispute? Well, what we did is, one of my consultants on the ground in Beijing was a former general in the People's Liberation Army. That speaks volumes. So we had to settle, and we had to settle this guy down. We dispatched our consultant. We literally talked him off the ledge. Said, listen, if you want to get out of here, you're going to have to sit down. We're going to have to debate this issue with your contractors, and we're going to have to come up with a reasonable explanation. Well, he was so angry, he didn't want to do it, but he put himself at risk. But we sat him down. We brought in Chinese lawyers. We did the negotiations, but had an exfiltration plan, and you eventually get him out. Admittedly, that's on the extreme end of things. But these are things that can happen, and they can happen quickly. He went there with the best intentions, but it didn't necessarily turn out that way. So does anybody have any questions about the pre-planning aspect of this? So if you were dealing with this particular type of product, and you have people that are traveling overseas, it would be reasonable for them to call us up. You can call me. You can come one of our analysts. We break down our analysts by regions of the world, and we have country area specialists. I have a dedicated kidnap-for-ransom and response analyst. So that if you were to ask me a specific question about what a kidnapping might look like in a various region of the world, I can get down into the weeds for you and tell you the following. What's the probability, I'll just answer your question in a minute. What's the probability of a kidnapping taking place? Who might be the perpetrators? What might it look like? How long you might be incarcerated? Would you be hurt? What do the ransom amounts look like? And what's your probability of survival? We'd want to do the same thing with the business traveler. We want to do a lifestyle review. You know, there are simple techniques that you can use that we do all the time when we speak to our clients about how to avoid becoming a victim in the first instance. And that's what we're all about. So you had a question?
I was going to ask, is the biggest danger when traveling abroad just a lack of knowledge about the area you're going into, not knowing what warning signs to look for?
You know, I think you put your finger on, and thank you. You may even get the bottle of wine. I don't know. But I think that the way you frame that question is so important. What are we? We're Americans, right? We got something called a U.S. passport. And we think that's a get-out-of-jail card, don't we? Sometimes we Americans, and I don't mean this in a real negative sense, we think we have a U.S. passport and that puts a huge prophylactic over us. And that we're never going to get in trouble and the cavalry's always going to come to the rescue. The fact of the matter is, it might be just the opposite. There are a lot of people out there that want to take advantage of Americans because there's a perception of wealth, there's a perception of arrogance. And look, if I were to bring a globe in here, and I was to ask somebody in here, please find Eritrea for me. You might, because you know. Damn it. That'd be somebody in the audience that knew.
Used to be Ethiopia, but that's
all right. You might even get the wine. But it is very, very important that the question that was raised, because look, there's no question that who we are, and there's no question about how strong we are. There's no question about our military prowess. But the fact of the matter is we don't know an awful lot about the rest of the world. I was having this conversation with Michael the other night, who has spent years working in the Middle East and in Dubai. And if you sat and talked to him, he could tell you in 10 minutes how successful he is running business in Dubai and how he had to adapt as opposed to doing business in the United States. He might find doing business in the United States even harder.
don't think so.
So, yes, sir.
I don't work for any of these people in here, but having been that businessman traveling overseas, that local knowledge is imperative. Who you give your passport to and who you give a copy of your passport to, little things like that make a difference in whether you are going to get out of there alive.
It really does. You know, we deal with a lot of non-governmental organizations. I don't know if any of your clients fit that mold. And they do wonderful things, you know, like us, they're always running to a crisis and not running away from it. And God knows, I don't know how these people have this internal fortitude to do what they do. And sometimes it's very hard to get through to people who might have faith-based NGOs, and because they really feel an obligation to go out and do good work. But sometimes they throw caution to the wind. I had one recently. Here's a good example. You may have heard this school. It's called Oxford University. It might be a pretty good school in the UK.
I've heard of it, yeah.
You're not a Cambridge man, are you?
I was Cambridge.
There you go. I get a phone call from the chief safety officer at Oxford University. There's a researcher gone overseas, and you know, researchers do what they want to do. But this researcher was found himself in parts of South America. And you know what her research involved? Research involved doing work in Argentina when the coups were there, when the military was there, doing work in Chile, and doing work in Uruguay about all the missing people. Now that's going back in history and dragging forward a lot of bad information, right? And guess what happens? She gets an errant email and it says, we're going to kill you. Now, Oxford is not the type of place to take these things dryly, if you will. I mean, they're going to react. And so they called. And so we had to do a couple of things in that instance. We had to determine whether or not we thought that threat was credible. And then you've got a cost-benefit analysis going on. You have the researcher who is staking her political professional career on completing this research. You have Oxford University and its responsibility of duty of care. And then you have the researcher itself and what her state of mind is. And who's going to mitigate those risks? So I have a conversation with the chief safety officer that explains this whole concept of duty of care. And we come to the conclusion that, you know what? Research can wait. This threat level to us sounds pretty significant. And so we did a warm transfer. In other words, we convinced her that she needed to take a step back. The research will continue. We moved her safely out of another country, and then we made a decision to help get her goods out of where she was to a safe location. You know, it may sound like a simple process, but you know what the hardest part of that was? Is trying to convince this person who we've now changed their life. I don't know if it's going to be for the, you know, that she will be killed at some point down the road if she continues with this research, but I know one thing we did, is that we solved a problem. And when you solve a problem for a university and you solve a problem for a researcher, it's a good day's work. And that's what we are about when we're handling issues with the business traveler. We need to solve their problems, and we need to solve them as quickly as possible. Yes?
One of the things that came to mind as you were talking, actually, that I didn't think about it. When I was in Dubai, embassy sorting out a passport or something, there's like a big electronic sign, maybe it's just the British, but the big electronic sign that basically says, if you get in trouble, do not call us, we will not help you. And it just flashes like constantly in the British embassy. Do not call us, we will not help you. If you get in trouble with the police, do not call us, we will not help you.
Yeah, I mean, we deal with police services all around the world, as you can imagine. Certainly on my side of the house, on the kidnap-for-ransom side, but I don't want to get too much into that, because the police services can come in all shapes and sizes. There is something called corruption. In certain areas of the world, it's called bakshish, which is bribery. I know I was associated with bribery, weren't you, in my introduction? Is that what you said? So, you know, sometimes working with the police isn't necessarily the best thing to do.
Chuck, there's a question.
Yes, ma'am.
Is there any place that you recommend that clients don't go, that it's just not safe at all?
I would not recommend taking a vacation in Syria at the moment. I think that would be problematic. I'm having a phone call early tomorrow morning about an NGO who is sending a person to Kabul. We just recently finished a kidnapping in Kabul. We had a non-governmental worker taken for 3 months, and we negotiated a ransom to get her out. And so Syria I would not recommend. Not necessarily saying North Korea is a place either. Iran, forget about. You know, the usual suspects. But I might say something surprising to you. Mexico isn't so bad. The kidnappings that we get involved in Mexico are Mexican, the victims are largely Mexican. Expats can go to Mexico and have a wonderful time. It's not to say that you aren't going to fall victim to a street crime. But more than likely, if you do have what might amount to a kidnapping situation, it may be an express kidnapping, where you're taken in an ATM machine, get held overnight or until the clock changes and they get more money out of your ATM. Not much you can do in a situation like that, except you put yourself in a bad position. Venezuela I wouldn't recommend going to. I got a call from the CEO of a FTSE 100 company in the UK recently, sort of like the 500 top companies in the country, 100 top companies. This CEO runs a big company and global, and they have an operation in Bangladesh. And the question was, he wanted to go out to dinner in Bangladesh. And he was asking us in Dhaka, the capital, and he was asking us for recommend a restaurant. I mean, that's a little out of my sweet spot, but I do understand what's behind it. You know, where can you go? When you were in Gabon working in the oil industry, I guess it was, you probably knew some places where to go that you felt safe.
Yes. There were some places we were told not to.
Yeah.
We went to town.
And that's what we do all the time for the business traveler, all the time.
So Jack, is there something we should do to prepare our data? Keep our financial data or patient data safer when we travel?
Well, I'll answer the question. The answer is yes. And there's a way to do that because you want to put some structure in place. And we have put together for our colleagues here a personal history spreadsheet that you can use, that you could give to your clients, for example, that will have on there their picture, their health record, and that kind of stuff. Next of kin notification and so on, because it's always good to have that stuff available if something goes badly, because the CEO of a company is going to be running around with their hair on fire, he or she, you know, asking for information about this person. So we begin there. And we begin with a trip planning packet. And we also, for many companies, create a template for a crisis management plan. Who's on the team? What happens when the bell rings? So it's an all-encompassing plan. With respect to your financial data, I mean, look what we're dealing with right now. Who got hacked the other day? Disney. Can you imagine? I mean, the National Health Service in the UK, you know, not all of it, but some of it. And look at how it's spread. On my side of the house with the kidnap-for-ransom policies, there's extortion, and so much of it is cyber-based now. You know, does anybody know how to explain a Bitcoin? Because I've been scratching my head trying to figure out how we pay a ransom in a Bitcoin. Because in my business, we pay ransoms, and it's usually in U.S. currency. So I've yet to pay a ransom in a Bitcoin. Yes, ma'am. I don't know, did I answer some of your question? Okay.
I also wanted to ask, when I read about this presentation happening, the first thing that came to my mind was, I felt like it was flipped. I wanted to ask you, has it ever been where you had someone international travel here to America for the purpose of kidnapping somebody within our own borders? You ever had that situation?
It's not happened to me personally, but I've had a lot of foreign visitors who come here who think that this is the Wild West. And culturally speaking, a Japanese visitor wouldn't necessarily happen here in Seattle, but in some other cities it could be problematic. The Japanese, particularly when they send their students over here, they're deathly afraid because they think everybody here carries a gun. And when they read stories about able to carry, a firearm into a bar or into the church, it really makes their head spin. But we don't have a kidnapping problem here. We have a crime problem. Kidnappings in the United States, would be the province of the FBI to hand with local jurisdiction. The thing that we have here that sometimes a lot of people get confused with when they associate with kidnappings, if I were to ask the question, do you know how many parental kidnappings take place in the United States every year? Thousands and thousands of them. But that's not traditionally the kidnapping that we're talking about. So we do get a lot of issues. We have, in our crisis center in Cape Town, we've made it a point to partner with Language Line, which speaks, we can bring people in to do, 100 some odd different languages. And we find that being able to speak their language, you get an awful lot more information out. And so we do a lot of that. But generally, they're not that concerned about kidnapping per se when the foreign visitor comes. They're really concerned about crime, general crime.
Because I was thinking, trying to think about kidnappers or the crime, something, you go on an international trip and you say or do something and you're lucky enough to get out and come home, they follow you, and then they end up.
Well, it's interesting that you say that. I'm just working a case in Germany. Now, that would not be the kidnapping hotspot of the world. But we had a 51-year-old man taken from a group home, the handicapped son of one of the wealthiest families in Germany. So you immediately assume there's some collusion. Kid didn't just, man didn't just walk out of the group home. Make a long story short, we found the man before the police did. We found him chained to a tree. He can't talk in real life, and we were afraid he was going to succumb to his, to the elements, because it was winter. But we found him, and we were dealing with we scripted negotiations with the bad guys. We didn't exchange any money because we found him. But you know what's happened? The bad guys have come back. And how did they come back? What do we all depend on? Email. So if you assume that there was inside information, now the emails are coming back and they're more invasive. A lot of specificity. So now the threat has extended to the extended family. Because they have the resources to take care of it, they're able to handle it. But what would happen to any of us? We wouldn't have the resources necessarily to respond that way. But that's an example of how things can escalate.
I was also thinking, if I continue.
No, please.
Was if I were traveling anywhere, even to Ohio, it doesn't matter. For me, it doesn't feel like there's no borders anymore, that they're everywhere. They're in the grocery stores, they're everywhere in the world. There's somebody that I feel like we should be cautious of. We can't identify anybody. And as much as I can't identify them, they can't identify me. And if they mistake me for Ivanka Trump, not that that's going to happen, but they may think that I'm her cousin or something and try to, I'm like, hey, look, I'm nothing.
Well, the good thing about this country is this, that we don't have a history of that type of kidnapping. That's not to say the same for other countries. So you're probably much safer here. You're more likely to succumb to an ordinary crime than you would something that I'm talking about here. So look, it's very simple for me to say, live your life. Remember after 9/11, I think President Bush said, let's all go live our life, as normal. Well, we know that was a feel-good message, and it doesn't necessarily mean we could all do it that way. But, we're pretty safe here. We're pretty safe here. But we do train people on street survival skills, awareness. We treat people how not to become a kidnap victim in the first place. You want to know a very simple trick?
Yes, that's what I meant.
Okay. Here are two tricks. One is certainly for the women in the audience. Here's the first trick, ladies. If you were ever accosted and the perpetrator is physically imposing and you don't think that you're able to survive, I would tell you the first thing you ought to do is lower your center of gravity if you can. And what does that mean? That means that you squat down like this a little bit, because it's awful hard for somebody to move you when your center of gravity goes down. And ladies, what do you have on your feet today? So you know what this is on the top of your foot? There are 300 bones on the top of your foot. And if you want to see a 300-pound guy go down to the floor like a sack of tomatoes, take those 3.5 wedge and just go right down on the top of the foot. See this? Well, you can always do this. You see the top of your nose? See your nose here? All you got to do is hit somebody in the nose, and what happens? And that's what you need. You need time. This is a standard technique that I teach people when they're on the street and they think they're being followed, and they think they might be a potential kidnap victim or assaulted. Most of us carry a phone or and what do we do with the phone all the time? We take a selfie, we do this. Turn the phone around, take the camera out, look them straight on, as if you're taking a picture. Seems simple enough, but you'd be surprised how that can ward off into script or something. So we teach kids, for example, in the UK and other regions of the world, they do a gap year before they're going to college and university, and oftentimes they do travel. So we teach them street survival skills, and we also teach them how to triage themselves if they get hurt. So, yes, ma'am.
What countries do you find the biggest danger for people being kidnapped into like sex trafficking? And how to avoid that? What are like the signs and symptoms that you follow in that?
The whole human trafficking issue, it is global now. The United States is inundated, if you will, with the human trafficking phenomenon. I live in Portland, Maine, a city of 70,000. Do you know that they have a problem with human trafficking and opiate overdoses? And that wasn't the specific question that you asked. But what countries? Well, obviously, regions of Africa. Huge problem in the Balkans. Parts of Romania. It's really surprising. It's a terrible thing. If you ask the police here in Seattle about human trafficking, I'm sure you'd be shocked. And it's not all coming up from Central America. Yeah. Look at what we learned today.
Actually, I went to a talk and the officer says he has a team of 3 people for the whole Puget Sound region. 3, that's it.
Yeah, that's under-resourced. I mean, Portland, Maine, I have a friend who's an agent in the Portland Resident Agency, and that's her job. She's seconded to a special team of the Portland Police Department to work on human trafficking. I mean, I'm shocked.
What do you suggest to people, particularly willing to avoid them ending up in a situation like that? Other people where
You may have just stumped me.
That's a bottle of wine.
Yeah.
Because that's an issue that begins at home. I mean, we're really getting into a very complicated issue. You know, why do kids leave home? Why do young women leave home? I mean, if you went to Washington, D.C. right now, you'd find out there's a whole task force working solely on young girls from 14 to 16 who have disappeared. Is it human trafficking? Is it a bad home life? Are they on the street? Where are they? And you would have the same issue here in Seattle with runaways. And when you're a runaway and you need to survive, you find yourself doing what? Drugs, falling into the wrong group. Next thing you know, you might have a habit, you have to feed the habit. It's a spiraling case. My wife, I've been married for 45 years. Thank you, I survived.
The applause went for the wife.
She would say the same thing. And she volunteers at something called Operation Hope, which is in Portland, and it's done by the Portland Police Department, and she's trying to put people who have drug habits into rehabilitation. And the one thing that she said that surprised her was it runs the cross-section economically. It's not just the disadvantaged. It can affect every segment of society. I don't want to get into, that's not what we're here to talk about, but anyway, yes ma'am.
What do you find are the most common challenges that people are facing in natural disaster settings? I work for an NGO and have worked always for NGOs and been to a lot of places where that's a challenge. But what are the top tips for avoiding or dealing with that sort of issue?
Well, can I give you some specific examples? As I indicated, we work a lot with NGOs. And the pre-planning process is absolutely essential. Let's take the earthquake in Haiti. A lot of NGOs were down there working, a lot of colleges and universities sent kids down there. I'm not sure why, because it can be very difficult. So when the earthquake hit, we were responding for NGOs and trying to get them out. So what does a large-scale evacuation look like? When airspace is closed, the U.S. Embassy is basically incommunicado. You have the prison collapsed and all the prisoners were out on the street. You had no water. You had very little food. And you had chaos. And you have the duty of care responsibility to get your staff out. And those staff have families. And they're in the States. And trust me, they'd be the first people that you'd hear from probably, right? So when we responded into Haiti, we had to take all this into consideration. So we were the first group into Haiti, as it was explained to me. And we had to charter fixed-wing aircraft out of Santo Domingo and fly in. And I had former British SAS officers doing the recon and doing the search, because we had 7 kids from Lynn University killed. They were killed in a hotel in a pancake, and we had to get the bodies out. So we set up our own field operation in there. We brought our own portable water, we bought rations, and we did this. This was as tough as it gets. But we had a plan, and we worked with the NGO to put this plan together so that we could also get bodies out, also work on getting people out, because, you know, on a private basis with planes and that kind of stuff. So we're accustomed to do it. What the NGO appreciated, and what some of the colleges and universities did, is they could shift their attention to managing the families, where we were doing on the sharp end of the spear, taking all that out. And if you don't have a plan for that, you know, you're really at a disadvantage if you don't pre-plan for it. Because everything in that situation is going to go wrong. Even with the best of planning, you can't account for every contingency, but you have to have a framework within your work. if you don't give the victims' families advice, if you don't set up liaison with them, if you are not talking to them, what happens? They don't trust you. And what do we all depend on today? Social networking. Because if you think it's going to go quiet, if you think you're going to have a severe problem when somebody gets on there and says on Facebook, Twitter, whatever, guess what they're not doing? These bastards. Let me give you a specific example that happened to a person in the insurance industry. A little bit different than what you asked me. I always love this story because I think our colleagues from Aetna and TBS will appreciate this. And brokers too. I worked for AIG for a while. Not for AIG, but I was responding for AIG. And the president of AIG Mexico got thrown in jail because a claim didn't go well. A client who was very good friends with high-ranking Mexican officials, he didn't like the way AIG settled the claim. So they went out and arrested the president of AIG Mexico. He had a heart problem, and he's put in a Mexican jail. Now, that's a claim adjudication, isn't it? How would you like to spend a weekend in a Mexican jail at the behest of the president of Mexico? Well, the wife of the Mexican president of AIG called Martin Sullivan, who was then the chairman of AIG. And she didn't get the response that she wanted, so the kids, her sons, went wild on Facebook. Now, do you think that the people in Mexico know what Facebook is? Do you think that the people in the high-rank Mexican government know what Facebook is? Of course they do. Do you think that helped us get him out? Probably not. So it took us a week to get him out, but we did get him out. The biggest thing we had to do was get him medicine. So you never know. You never know what a crisis looks like. You never know how something simple is going to turn into something catastrophic.
How did you get in shape?
With him? Yeah, the President of the United States did.
Oh, great.
That's power.
How about if somebody in Dubai let him know over there, right up?
Well, you're sitting next to a subject matter expert.
I got arrested all the time.
That's why they had the flashing sign.
But I think, but I was saying yesterday, Michael made a very good point. He was talking to us about how to do business in Dubai. And I don't want to, he can speak for himself. But I thought it was very interesting what he was saying that, you know, you could go in and you could speak to a major sheikh in Dubai. You could have a conversation with them about doing something, perhaps getting a license and so on. And what would be the usual response to Michael?
Do whatever you want in Dubai, but you need to give someone a suitcase of money. And so, as an American organisation, the way that you do business is very different to how local companies would do business. And so I was saying, like, you know, we're looking for a license in Dubai, for example, and it's closed. There are no new licenses. But if you work with this sheikh and this sheikh's company, they will open that up, they will give you a license, and they'll close it again. But we can't do that. We're an American organisation, so it's just a different way of. There's different things that you have to handle in a place like the Middle East that you might not have to handle in the US or the UK.
And that's the same, and it's sort of just an extension of what a business traveler has to take into consideration. You know, we're not always right. You have to yield to what another country desires. And you have to be smart about it. Before I close, let me just discuss a little bit about what's dear and personal to me. and it has to do with kidnapping. As I said, I run the kidnapping-for-ransom response team, and kidnappings around the world have increased. The leading countries of the world where kidnaps proliferate have changed a little bit, but the usual suspects are there. Mexico is right up there, Nigeria is right up there, other parts of the world. But I wanted to have a discussion with you today because this is something that was seared in my memory. And we all saw the grisly pictures on television of some of our citizens being beheaded by ISIS. James Foley, Stephen Saltoff, Kayla Mueller. She wasn't beheaded. And we know that the United States has killed Jihadi John, the man who was perpetrating this. We took him out with a predator. But I wanted to talk to you a little bit because I was involved in some of those cases on an ad hoc basis. And it led to a discussion with the Obama administration about what the United States government position is vis-a-vis paying ransom to terrorist groups, what's permissible and what isn't. And I thought I'd take a minute today to explain to you what I know to be the rules as to what you might hear in the media. What I know what you can do and what you can't do. And what the Obama administration did to address what they thought was some terrible mistakes that they made. And all these were done as a result of James Foley's mother and Kayla Mueller, the girl that was laid out in a white funeral shroud. She went to Northern Arizona University. I spoke at length to her mother and father. And they were explaining to me that they had met with the president. And they explained that they weren't happy with what the United States government was doing. And they weren't people of great wealth. But like any of us, you know, what would we do if our daughter was kidnapped? We would try to do whatever we could to get them out. Well, we as a company had negotiated for the release of a Danish citizen held by ISIS with James Foley. We paid $2 million to get him out. 18 months. Now, you may say, why would you ever pay the money? Well, we paid it to get him out. When we debriefed him, he was telling us about what they were doing to Jim Foley, what they were doing to him, which led to a further discussion with Kayla Mueller and her mother and father. I'll circle back now. I'm on the phone with Mr. Mueller, and he's saying, Jack, you know, we're really troubled. You know, we're not getting all the information we think. You know, I want my daughter out. They're going to kill her. And so we're trying to work a strategy. And he said, well, you know, when I met with the president. I said, you met with the president? He said, yes. I said, how long did you meet with the president for? My wife and I met with the president for an hour and a half. I want you to think about that for a minute. This is not a political statement. There are cabinet secretaries that in their entire 4 years will never get an hour and a half with the president. President Obama said to Mr. Mueller, I would do anything in the world to get Malia and Sasha out. We had an offer on the table of €7 million. Because we had a guy that was close, knew what was happening, we had to determine whether or not that €7 million offer was real. We determined that it was real. They were told that they were going to be prosecuted. that they'd paid the money. We had a private donor come forward with the money. That private donor was told they'd be prosecuted. That's why things changed. The money was not allowed to go through.
Who's going to do the prosecution?
U.S. government. Now, here's the conundrum. The United States government, as written policy, does not pay ransom to terrorist groups. Executive Order 123698. We will not stop private citizens from engaging in conversation with hostage takers, even if they are the Taliban, even if they're the Haqqani network, any prescribed terrorist group. The FBI is the lead agency, and the FBI looks at ransom, the actual exchange of money, as part of the evidentiary chain. There's the loophole. It was bad information that was given to that family. And that's why the president sat down and explained and changed the rules. So in our world, we get criticized a lot because we do pay ransom. 85–90% of the cases that we get involved in, we pay ransom to get people out if it's a business transaction. That's what it is. But there are exceptions. We're not going to, we can't solve prisoner exchanges with the Taliban. But we can find something else to deal with. You work for an NGO. There are many NGOs that said, if they're faith-based or whatever, we're not going to pay ransom. It's just anathema to us. We're not going to do it. But they can do other things. We can build a water filtration plant. We can help educate people on birth control. Whatever it is, we'll find a way. This is about saving lives, not destroying them. Somebody had a question. Yes, ma'am. It would really depend on what the sentencing guidelines are. But in the specific executive order that I just referred to, there's language in there that says the United States government will not prosecute anybody. So they're taking it off the table. And that's not widely known. So we've covered, I think I'm running over time. We've covered a lot of territory today. And we'll circle back and sum things up. Look at the duty, I'll get to you in a second. Look at the duty of care of you as brokers. I would like for you to take that concept of duty of care and apply it to you in this way. Look at your client base. Think of it as you're responsible. You have a duty of care. Are you doing enough in your work to make sure that your client is protected? From a legal standpoint, none of us likes to get sued. You have errors in admission insurance, you have professional liability. Why don't you have this? It's affordable. Protect yourself. Protect your client. It's a value added. To me, it seems obvious. You probably pay as much for your health care and homeowners insurance and everything else. Take this message to your clients. Bring something value added. Bring something different. Yes, ma'am.
Is that why your Nurses Crisis Center is strategically based in Cape Town?
Say that again,
Like
huh?
your crisis center, it's in Cape Town.
It's in Cape Town.
Yeah, so it's outside the United States. It's strategic.
No, it isn't. 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 It isn I think it's in Cape Town because the owners of the company like South African wine.
That's strategic.
And they love Cape Town. No, you know, I'm not gonna hurt you. I'm gonna tell you. Can I have you stand up for a second?
Now you can.
Okay. And your name is?
Carrot.
Karen. This gentleman right here, by the power invested in me by the city of Seattle, you're now husband and wife.
Take a shotgun.
And I do this for a reason, because I want to illustrate a point about kidnapping. He is a wonderful looking guy. And I think they're a wonderful looking couple, don't you? He's a business person. You know, he travels internationally. He goes to Turkey. He goes to India. He goes all over the place. You wish him well, but you're glad he's out of here. So he's off when traveling, and you're supposed to have a phone call. The kids are complaining, you know, they want to speak to dad, so and so forth. Phone call doesn't come in. So you call John, his business partner. Hey, where is it? He doesn't know. He's supposed to, you know, he calls the cell phone, blah, 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 nothing happens. And all of a sudden you get a phone call from somebody. Because he's overseas and the phone rings and it's him on the phone. It doesn't sound right. He says to you, I'm kidnapped. And they want $4 million. And you have 24 hours to get it. First move. He's a nice guy. Is he worth it? Of course he's worth it. But the point is that, what would you do in a case like that? All kinds of thoughts go through your mind, right? I don't have $1. I'm up against the clock. I need to solve it. That's where the life. So, anybody here want to make a guess as to what the first move might be? Call us, but let's go a step further. Should she capitulate? Anybody think she should say, oh, sure, you take a check? You've been watching television. You saw Man on Fire or something, didn't you? Proof of Life. No, it's true. Your response would probably be, I don't have that kind of money. But the emotional trauma and stress is enormous. 24 hours is going to be killed. Is this situation solvable? Is there a method, a methodology that we can use to bring this to a logical conclusion? If you have a heart problem, do you go to a podiatrist? You go to a subject matter expert. And that's why we come in. Because we would tell her, no, you're not going to say yes. And we're going to work and contingency plan to get her husband out. And if we know what country it's in, we can predict for you probably how much it's going to cost you, how long it's going to take, possibly figure out whether it'll hurt him.
So what information should she be getting at that phone call? I mean, if you can gather yourself enough. I was thinking, where are you? Do you have?
Some people don't know whether it's a gag or not.
Yeah.
But when the phone call comes, generally people, you'll be surprised how they can compartmentalize information and actually act very normally.
Mm-hmm.
What she's probably going to do is get very upset, probably going to call John. John's probably going to call me. And then we're gonna off to the game, because I'm gonna bring in a consultant who's a subject matter expert probably on the country that he's in. And I'll be able to go to my research analysts and find out what the demands look like. Who's doing the perpetrating? And we're gonna structure a negotiation along those lines. But guess what? We don't actually do the negotiations, we structure them. We will have possibly John do the negotiations. We'll have a whiteboard up here. And you can see what I've written up here. It's not just about paying ransom. Because we're going to have him do the negotiations to get his big business partner out and solve the problem. And when we make our first offer, it's going to respect life. And we're going to come up with a ransom settlement figure. And we're going to get that by making a first good offer. And then we're going to increase our, we're going to go over a course of time, escalate the amounts, but each time we offer something it's lower and lower, and we're going to separate him from his corporate partner. It's going to be a family negotiation. And you're going to say, oh, that's never going to work. If it's economically motivated, it's going to work. We'll tell the bad guys that they're selling the car, hawking the rings, you name it. If it's economically motivated, we'll solve it. Are you glad to have him back? Thanks.
Do you have a training package or something, a briefing package for people who travel to countries at higher risk of what to expect in that first 24 hours that they're taking captive?
Well, we do teach survival skills.
But that's more than survival, it's how to answer, what to expect, how you know, you might be getting hit for the first time in your life.
Oh yeah, I mean, I would tell you that most kidnappers are successful at the point of attack. If you resist, you probably get pummeled. But your natural impulse is fight or flight, right? Your natural impulse is going to fight. You have to put up with that. But the vast majority of cases, again, if it's economically motivated, you're a valuable commodity. The inexperienced kidnapping gangs, you know, they do some silly things. But the good ones, you know, you're a commodity, you're a value, they're not going to hurt you, generally, and they'll keep you in pretty good shape. Not always. I had a kidnapping in Nigeria of a doctor for an NGO, and his wife and I did the negotiations through Skype. And she insisted on delivering the ransom, much to my dismay. But what I didn't find out, we delivered the ransom on a Friday, it's a quick-moving case, and I'm giving instructions over Skype. And she had given birth to her fourth child on Monday. And the ransom was delivered on Friday. I had no idea. It was working so quickly, you know. And her, you know what her response was, ladies? That's my husband. He's the father of my children, and I'm responsible for him. And I could not dissuade her from not delivering that ransom. We were lucky. But that, in that culture, that's the way it worked. It's a fast-moving case. You don't have time to, you know, fly people in. You have to get on the horn right away. It's to the point we were talking earlier about how quickly your response is. You want to lose the confidence of your people, your clients, is not responding quick enough. If I fail to respond, I get sued. So I do have a business interest in this, or a legal interest. Yes, ma'am.
You spent too much time to hear a Bin Laden story.
Should we
I think we
finish?
should do at least one Bin Laden story.
If I had any success, how can I say success when 9/11 took place? But if I had some success, it was getting guys from Al-Qaeda to cooperate. And I traveled the world with a team, and we found people, and they were members of Al-Qaeda, did terrible things. Some of them were prosecuted, some of them in the witness protection program. And one guy in particular I'm particularly fond of, Jamal Ahmed, or Fadl. We gained his cooperation, He was close to bin Laden, and he had done a lot of different things for bin Laden, and but he was greedy, so he took some money from bin Laden, and he was on the run. Nothing like a greedy terrorist. And and he needed a safe place to land. So we flew over to Eritrea, and we debriefed him, and we thought maybe he might be a little bit nuts. But then he turned out to be the real deal. So we didn't know a whole lot about the inside and workings of Al-Qaeda. But when we got Jamal Ahmed al-Fadl to communicate with us, he gave us a day in the life of bin Laden. I knew where he slept, what he ate, how much he weighed, what his physical well-being was, who his favorite wife was, that he actually liked to play soccer, that he was a mama's boy, he was a hypochondriac. I wanted to know everything that I could possibly learn about Osama bin Laden. And I had a guy sitting in front of me who knew everything about it. And that opened up a whole panoply of things that we went forward now and found other people around the world. And you know what the key to our success was? What do you think?
His health.
We treated him humanely. We got him a lawyer. We talked. We smuggled 25 members of his family out of various countries, brought him to the United States.
Mrs. Jamal, you're talking about
Mhm.
Jamal.
He had a child born in our custody, had a heart problem. The United States government paid $750,000 for a heart transplant. Does that sound a little bit different than maybe some of the things you've heard about harsh interrogation techniques, head slapping, sensory deposition, waterboarding? I'm just telling you what works.
That would work.
And he's the first witness to walk into a courtroom in the United States of America, stand up on the witness stand in the Southern District of New York, in the United States versus Osama bin Laden, put his hand up on the Quran, and a translator said the following: "My name is Jamal Ahmed al-Fadl. I'm a member of Al-Qaeda, and I came here to testify." In the front row were the two widows of the two U.S. Delta Force people who had been killed in Operation Black Hawk Down. And we brought 300 plus witnesses from Nairobi over when the embassies got blown up, including the U.S. ambassador. And Jamal Ahmed al-Fadl laid out for the court, it's all on the record, the whole history of Al-Qaeda, how he became a member, and what he did. That's the type of actionable intelligence you want. That's what you want in terms of cooperation. He's in the witness protection program. And believe me, he was a handful. Oh, I forgot to mention. He developed a fondness for 7-Eleven. And he played the lottery. And he won. He had to forfeit money though.
He had bin Laden's money.
Can you imagine trying to explain this to a judge? Judge Leonard standing in a courtroom, sealed courtroom in New York, and Jamal goes up there to plead guilty. And the judge says, "Mr. al-Fadl, have you come before me today of your own free will?" "Yes, Your Honor." Has the United States government coerced you in any way to come before me today to plead guilty? "No, Your Honor. However," however, we're all dying. swore on the Korean to tell the truth. I won the lottery. The judge is apoplectic at this point. He said to the court reporter, "Can you please read that back to me?" Mr. O'Farrell won the lottery. That's what I thought. It's like, I'm booking, you know, and the judge says, "I'd like to have a sidebar, please." With the gift, and we had to explain what happened. The judge says, "Well, where's the money?" Yeah, well, we turned it into the U.S. Treasury. What a great country. I think we should tell that story to every terrorist from ISIS. You know. Well, look, I've jumped all around. I hope that you found some of this stuff interesting. You've been very polite. You've asked some good questions. And I think that these type of conversations that we have are very valuable. And I think you can go forward from here with maybe some thoughts. About, you know, your business travelers, some of the things that go on in the world that we don't have any control of, but we can prepare for. Thanks.
Do you need the mic? I don't think so. Can everybody hear me back there? I'm going to be short, so. All right. Well, we wanted to wrap up today with just some practical takeaways for you. And
Well, I just ruined
I think I'll just leave that on the table there.
Is that one of your techniques?
On ways that you can discover international opportunities, and as a trusted advisor, questions that you can be asking your clients as well. And I'm not going to go through every single one of these, but first and foremost, check if your clients have any international locations. That's a good first step. And do they have a plan in place for those employees? The other one I want to impress upon you is number 6. How do they satisfy their duty of care employer responsibility? This was mentioned by Kim and Jack and John. Very important. As well as management, crisis management plan. Make sure that you have that in place. If you'd like a list of these questions, I'm happy to email it to you, as well as a crisis management plan template and things that we can do to assist. And again, this lunch was sponsored by Total Benefit Solutions, partnered with Aetna. We do have flyers here on the Travel Well card plan, as well as Red 24. We look forward to partnering with you on all your international needs. We will be available after the lunch. We're going to stick around if you have any questions as well. So thank you very much, everybody, for joining us.